Welcome, everybody. My name is Kate Butler, and I'm the Library Information Systems Specialist at the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners. Um, just a few kind of housekeeping things before we get started. If you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat or raise your hand and unmute and say it out loud. Either way, we have my colleague Jacoby McNeely will also be looking at the chat, and she'll let me know if I've missed a question or something like that. Also, let me know if you have trouble hearing me or the shared screen has screwed up and you can't see anything anymore. Um, just let me know and I will stop and get it to work again. So with that said, we're going to start on our web accessibility webinar. Today's topic is semantic HTML. Um, so what is semantic HTML? It is, according to Wikipedia, it's the use of HTML markup to reinforce the semantics or meaning of the information in web pages and web applications, rather than merely to define its presentation or look. In other words, you want to use the HTML to define the structure of the document and define the purpose of the content. And then you use other means to define the layout and the visual appearance. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? You build something first, then you decorate it. So why is this so much of a problem on the web? Because believe me, this is a real problem on the web. Um, There's actually a lot of historical reasons for that. Some of which I think actually probably goes back to word processing software. But if we're just looking at the history of HTML, the distinction between structure and styled was, they failed to incorporate that from the very beginning. When HTML1 was released back in 1993, there were 18 tags. Some of them were structural and some of them were stylistic. Throughout the 90s, they released more and more versions of HTML, and more style tags were added into the mix. Web developers also started cannibalizing non-style tags like table to force visually pleasing layouts onto their pages. Web browsers were inconsistent with how they rendered tags, or they failed to properly implement things that were presented as layout alternatives. It was pretty much a huge mess. Um, the idea of separating style from the design was proposed really quickly, actually. But what ended up as what we now know as CSS, cascading style sheets, it actually took quite a while to include robust layout options and for it to be properly supported by most web browsers. So this less than ideal situation, it carried on for a really long time in web terms. And it became ingrained in a lot of people and unfortunately baked into a lot of websites. So for the most part now, in 2025, it's completely possible to make HTML, CSS web pages look great and have a sound, well-defined tag structure. But a lot of people still have really bad habits developed over 30 years of work with shifting standards of HTML. CSS can be really frustrating and confusing. I know I am not the only one who spent hours reloading a page over and over again, making tiny adjustments, trying to understand why that one thing just won't be the right color. Um, and so it's understandable why a lot of people will just give up at that point and go back to something that works because they don't have the time to figure out a better way. But now we have a deadline for compliance, and we need to make sure that we're doing it a better way. So the best practices are actually pretty simple in this case. You use your HTML to make your content structure. You take your content and you surround it with the HTML tags that define what the function of the content is. Is it a paragraph? Is it navigation? Is it a header? Is it a footer? Figure out what that is and put it in the tags. Then you take CSS to make it pretty and to control how it looks on the page. Instead of forcing your layout into a table, you use grid or flexbox to place things the way you want them to be organized. Now, a lot of you probably don't even really ever see the underlying HTML on your pages because you have a content management system like WordPress or Drupal or Civic Plus or whichever, and it hides that stuff from you. So we will get back to that in a bit, but we're going to start by looking at the actual HTML. Um, and before we jump to the sample page that I've made, these are the tags that we're talking about when we say semantic HTML. Every page starts with the same basic structure. You have an HTML tag that signals this is an HTML document. You have a head where you put a bunch of code and links to things that are external. And then you have a body where you have your main content. Then, depending on what kind of content you have, you put in your landmark tags. And those identify the purpose of each region slash area slash section, whatever you want to call it. And then within each region, you would identify the content by its function. So you have headers, you have paragraphs, you have lists, you have tables, that sort of thing. All right, I'm going to try and change my sharing to a web browser. Let's see how that goes. All right, are we seeing this? You
Yep.
should see, okay, a page that says library advisory. Okay, good, that looks right. Okay, so here is a really simple page. Visually, you can see that it looks like it makes pretty good sense. You know, we've got a big header at the top, some smaller headers, some paragraphs, some lists. It looks pretty good. But let's check the structure and make sure. Now, there are actually a couple of ways to do that in most modern web browsers. Um, You've got view page source. That's kind of the old school way. If you pick that, it just literally shows you whatever the web browser can see as the underlying HTML structure of the page. And this is fine. I don't actually like this anymore because it's just so basic. You can't really do anything with it once you've got this here. So what I usually do instead is this inspect feature. And what inspect does is it opens a window over on the side or on the bottom. It just opens up a panel where you can access different things about the page. Um, so you can see here that you actually can see the source code as well. And I apologize for all of the flashing. Um, what it does is it lets you open and close the tags. And when you hover over a particular tag, if it's something that's visible, it will show you what that tag encompasses. So like the body of the page is this whole big thing. It includes kind of a margin on the side and then the big blue area, which is actually what's encompassed in this main tag, which is our landmark tag that's encompassing all of the content. And you can see, you can hover, you can say, oh, here's my H1, here's a paragraph, H2, the lists. As you go through it, you can look at it and you say, okay, well, the structure here actually doesn't look too bad. We've got some basic page elements, we've got our HTML, we've got our head, we've got our body, we've got our region, and we've got a bunch of headers and paragraphs that seem to go in a pretty logical order. It starts with H1, goes to H2. We don't see any weird tables that are forcing it to kind of go in a weird direction. Looks pretty good. Um, so you might have something to be fixed here. You know, I think that the color contrast looks pretty good on these colors. Maybe that's not great, but that's not what we're going to cover today. Um, so let's look instead at this page over here. Looks pretty much like the same page, doesn't it? So we're going to open up the panel and take a look at it. Um, so it looks pretty much identical, but let's look. Doesn't seem to be, maybe it's not as good as the other one. So what do people see? Can people see what's wrong with it? Or maybe I need to make this bigger. Do you need me to zoom in? Let me see if I can make it bigger. No, that's just going to zoom in on the page itself, not on this. Wonder if I can make this larger. Hmm. All right, you know what? I like the inspect panel, but we're going to go to view page source because I think I can actually zoom in on that. Yeah. All right. All right. Can people actually see the text now, or do we need it bigger? That's right. So Dylan points out that the H2 is used first and then followed by H1. That doesn't make any sense. All right. Do you guys see anything else that might be missing or weird about this page? Yep. So Danielle noticed that there's a paragraph that doesn't use p tags. It's just got some line breaks after it instead, which is not helpful to somebody perhaps using a screen reader. Let's see. All right. Anybody else see anything? There's one more thing which is a little bit more obscure in terms of the semantic HTML, which is the landmarks or regions. And when we have our presentation on automatic testing extensions, you'll learn more about this because it will pick those up because it's one of the things it can test for. But basically, if you have bits of the page that are for a particular purpose, like this is the main content or this is my navigation menu, you want to enclose those in a tag that lets a screen reader know so that the person can skip around. If they don't want to see the menu, they can just skip to the next section. And this particular page, it has a body tag, but it doesn't have anything that identifies the main content. All right. Um, so anyway, as you can kind of see, this page visually looked identical to the last one, but just because it looked right didn't mean that the underlying structure was correct. Um, so underneath, when you have some pretty weird stuff going on, this tends to happen, especially with headers, when a particular header level is given a particular visual appearance. And if you look at the styles here, you can see that what's happened is that somebody has gone in and defined, okay, well, I want H1 to be this size and this color, and I want H2 to be this size and this color. And then they've used it accordingly, but they haven't used it in reference to whether is this actually the top header or is this the secondary header? They've just used it because that's the size and color that they wanted. All right, so now let's get back to the presentation. Is this gonna go? Okay. Um, all right. So as I said before, you can't really decorate something that isn't built. Um, Not to say you can't have a design plan ready to go, and in fact you should, but really it's ideal to create your content and mark it up based on its structure first. Then you want to add the design elements and the classes. So content that is structurally sound but not pretty, you can still make that available while you make it look better. content that is pretty but not structurally sound, you really shouldn't make that available until you've made it accessible to everyone. Now this sounds pretty simple and straightforward, right? But what if you already have a whole website like most of us and you have to go in and fix it? Well, honestly, it is a big task. I'm not going to lie. Baking this in from the start is way easier. For an existing website, especially if you need to keep it online while you do the fixes, and you're not going to do an entire website from scratch, you are just going to fix the old one so it's the same and it looks the same, but it's just more accessible. The most straightforward thing is going to be to start with pulling out the styles. Figure out what they are. What are the colors? What are the fonts? What are the font sizes? Anything decorative that is making it look different from the default. So ideally at that point, you'll be able to create a new style sheet where you define the old styles as classes instead of right on the tags. Once you've got that, you can start going through the site page by page and swap out the old styles with the new styles. You strip out the bad elements and then you publish the new version of the page in place of the old one. And meanwhile, the rest of the site is fine because you've kept all of that old CSS and code still there while you're working on it. Is this something that everybody can do? Well, it depends. It depends on how complex your site is, and it depends on what you're using to manage your site. So for instance, a lot of libraries have WordPress as their site for an example. So the tricky part with WordPress is, one, it has a visual editor, which makes it really difficult to see what the styles are that you're adding. And two, the theme is pulled out. It's not actually anywhere near the editor. It's in its own section, and you may or may not have access to edit that depending on your level of privileges in the WordPress program. But I am going to show you just a quick guide in the MBLC's blog. Let's see, where was I here? I think this is the one. All right. So this is the WordPress backend. If you're familiar with it, this is where you look at your list of posts. And if you click on to add a post, you will get brought to this block editor. And WordPress does a lot of things automatically. Like if you type something in the title, when you publish that page, that's going to be given in H1, and that makes sense. You do not have any ability to add a second H1 on this page without doing a lot of work to do it. If you pick a block, it gives you some common things, or you can look at all of them over here on the left. You've got different kinds of text blocks, different kinds of media blocks. Now, what WordPress has done is sort of munged together. Some of these things are structural, like paragraphs, headings, lists. Some of them are more stylistic or depend on the type of content. So like a table should use for tabular data. Shouldn't use it to try to organize a bunch of pictures or other information that is not meant to be in a table. In that case, you should probably use grid. But there's no, it's your responsibility to remember that. So let's say we want to add a heading. So by default, it knows that H2 is the next one, but you can change that if you need to. Click on that. You can pick which heading you want. But then if I hit heading again, it assumes that I want another H2. So if you're doing it, you need to keep making sure that you're checking the right levels. So at a basic level here in WordPress, you have control over the structure of a page or a post. It is your responsibility to know what you should be using for the stuff that you're going to put on the page. Um, but WordPress will control the styling and whether or not it's accessible at that level. So let me go back to the appearance section. So here under appearance, which you may or may not have access to if you're an editor versus an admin, you can have access to the theme where you can make changes to things like the styles. So like here's where the style themes are. So if you needed to make a change to a color or a font globally, this is where you would make those edits. Okay. So for other CMS, you might not have any control or access to anything beyond a really basic editor. That is really unfortunate. So if your website's controlled by a vendor or the town or somebody else who won't give the library any higher level of access, you're going to have to figure out what to do. The library is still responsible for its site. Um, so you have to keep going, even if you keep hitting roadblocks like we can't afford that or we can't give you that. I'm not a lawyer, but the vendor charged me too much to make fixes doesn't sound like a winning argument in a lawsuit. It probably will not stand up. There are legal ramifications to ignoring problems that you know about, so you do need to try and stay on top of this. At the very least, document your efforts to get it fixed. All right. Finally, we've got just a few tricks to help yourself keep the distinction between the structure and the style of a page. Um, don't put a lot of styles on your tags. If by default all of your H tags look the same, you don't get tempted to use them as a shortcut for a particular look. Keep your classes pretty simple. Name them descriptively. You can add multiple classes to an element, so you don't need to have to try and create super specific classes that handle every detail of a particular style. Have some classes for color and other ones for size. And then you can combine large red, large green. You can be more flexible. And finally, be ruthless in getting rid of content. Weed your site. So many sites have like 5 to 10 pages of content that anybody ever uses. And then the rest of it is just there. And I'm not saying that you need to get rid of things like your policy page, even if no one ever looks at it, you want to have that online. But if you come to a page and you find yourself saying, but what if, when you're thinking about that page and the only thing you can think of about it is, but what if, it's probably a sign that you could let that page go. And then you don't have to worry about it being accessible because it's not there. Okay, questions. Oh, and I managed to not speak that fast. Got through 25 minutes. All right, I'm going to stop the sharing. All right, and I'm actually going to, no, yeah, I'll stop the recording too.